My name is Andrea Vogt. I'm heading Global Public Affairs at Danfoss Climate Solutions. This live stream from Sonderborg, which is, as I heard this morning at the IEA conference, the capital of energy efficiency. So we are very proud to be here and also very happy to have three very good speakers who will enlighten us on energy efficiency, on technologies, on sector integration and also on renewables. So we all know that the message is very clear coming from the last IPCC report. We need to act urgently on climate. We also know that we need to act urgently on energy. So therefore, I think we'll have a very timely discussion, starting with Rana Adib, who is the Executive Director of REN21, and who will give us her perspective on the development and the increase of renewables over those last years, and the outlook also, whether you think, Rana, is this enough? Is it enough to tackle the climate crisis? How do you see this development from your perspective? And perhaps you can also say 2 words about REN21.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrea, and very excited to be here with you. Yes, maybe quickly on REN21 to start with. So REN21 is a multi-stakeholder policy network, so governments, industry, NGOs, research, academia, working together to accelerate renewables. I think what is important to mention here is when we speak about accelerating renewables, from the supply side, it means developing renewable energy, but it obviously also means that we need to reduce the energy demand through energy saving and efficiency. So there are 3 pillars actually which are underlying this transition to renewable-based energy system, economy and society. What is the perspective? I think from the renewable energy side, the perspective is first a very positive message. In terms of cost, we see that renewable energy today is globally basically the least cost option, especially when we're looking into renewable energy power. But what we also see is that unfortunately, the increase and the ramp up of renewable energy has not been enough to really make the shift happen. When we are looking at the total global final energy demand, we see that over the last decade, the share of renewables has moved from 8.7% to 11.2%. And this basically means that over this period, we have been consuming mainly fossil fuel. The share here has basically not changed from 80.3% to 80.2% in a decade. And ultimately, this means that we're consuming much more fossil fuel today than ever because the energy demand has increased. So there is clearly a need for a structural change that needs to occur very urgently.
And why? What do you think would be needed in terms of a structural change? I mean, we see if we take the EU just as an example, we have the Fit for 55, we have the Renewable Energies Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, we have Repower now. So there's actually a lot of policy measures out there. Yes. So what do you think needs to happen to make this structural change, to turn it into reality?
I think there are what we see is today the efforts in renewable energy and efficiency are not enough. Just as a reminder, fossil fuel is responsible for 75% of the CO2 emissions. So one clear message is we need to phase out fossil fuel production and use of it. And that is something which is indeed not an easy task because we are operating in an economy, in power dynamics and in policy system which has been centered around fossil fuel. This means, however, that we need to ban those, and the reality is that 115 countries worldwide are still subsidizing fossil fuel. So I think there is one message which is clear: phasing out fossil fuel needs to happen and creating the right enabling framework. Another structural problem is when we're looking into the different sectors, that we see that most of the advancement occur in the power sector, and the power sector, however, is only responsible covering more or less 20% actually of the total final energy demand. When we're looking into heating and cooling, we have a share of renewable energy of 10%, so heating and cooling for buildings and industry.
And that's global, I think.
That's global, yes. And in transportation of only 3.7%. And I think this is actually what also we see in Europe today. We need economy-wide planning, infrastructure planning, policies, regulatory frameworks, but we also need to have sectoral strategies here that are really anchored because the needs, the market realities and the economics are very different from a sector to another.
And how do you see then the interplay? We heard this morning our CEO Kim Fausing say that energy efficiency and renewables need to go hand in hand. So how do you see this interplay between the two if you look at sectoral policies, as you were just saying?
Very clearly, the interplay is fundamental. I think this is also, it is fundamental, but unfortunately I also think even as sustainable energy players, we still have a long way to go, because we do not always build on each other's strengths and have clear joint messages. We're working towards the same goal, but there is still a part of who get the bigger pie. Efficiency first, renewable energy first. The reality is you need both, and we can only move to a renewable-based system if we reduce basically the energy consumption. But also from the efficiency side, bringing in renewable energy already brings a certain efficiency. There are possibilities for technological developments and real advantages in terms of business models and also attraction to policymakers. I think I take an example from transport. Electric mobility, for instance, is clearly a hype and reduces the energy consumption of vehicle to a third of the consumption. Globally, we only have 3 countries that are basically building or integrating their policies for electric mobility and linking it to the fact that we are using renewable electricity. And here we would really need to have a message which is, we change the technology, but we also change the fuel from diesel or gas actually to renewable electricity in this case. So I think there is a lot of space to connect basically the different policy makers, the policies, regulative frameworks, but also infrastructure planning, because the reality is we cannot only look at the demand and the supply, we also need to think about grids, distribution grids, transmission grids, charging stations for electric mobility, storage, and this clearly requires, I think, long-term strategies.
For sure, yes, it does. I'm just looking at the time and at if there are any questions, and I don't see questions for now, and we still have a little bit of time. So, so maybe just to build on what you were just saying on not thinking in silos and making sure that different policies are connected and that we also look at the infrastructure. So if you compare what is happening in Europe to other regions in the world, REN21 is a global network. So is there any region where you would say here it really happens, it's really connected, the different sectors, or is this some construction side a little bit everywhere in the world?
I think it's construction side, to be honest. I think it's also something to mention positively that at the European level, during the last two years, also in response to COVID, to the green recovery, there has been a stronger sectoral strategies. So the European Union has indeed taken like a global economy-wide targets and translated them into sectoral plans. So that's something which is positive. Now, obviously, it depends on how it is integrated in the countries and the member state countries. And we also see that there is a lot of pushback still when it comes to implementation and partly contradicting policy and regulator frameworks. Now, are there countries where we have really strong joint approaches? I think there is I always like this example of Costa Rica, because here we have seen they have really driven, they had very good starting conditions, for instance, for renewable electricity. But there was at one point really this awareness that it was quite stupid to import fossil fuel for transportation. And the government has really made it as basically a societal project to also move not only the energy transition, but the transport transition to a sustainable mobility, which is electricity based with local renewable electricity. And I think just in those times basically of energy security discussions, energy economics, price challenges, I think it's really important that governments take this as an opportunity to really move into affordable and sustainable future energy services, building on efficiency and renewable energy.
That's a very nice ending sentence of your of your explanation. So I would like to thank you very much, Rana, for your input. I'm taking away from what you were saying: phase out fossil fuels, not work in silos, connect the different sectors, and also look at the infrastructure. And there are some good examples out there, so that's certainly encouraging. And let's move on this track. And we'll now hear from the next speaker, actually, a bit more in depth about heating and cooling and about heat pumps more specifically. So thank you very much, Rana, for your input.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. Very welcome.